Awesome. All right. So where we're after all those announcements, where we're going to kick it off is where we left off, which is on page 153. And where we're picking up is our hope. So it is the second full paragraph, our hope. And we're in the chapter A Vision for You. And we're talking about the vision. And we were kind of joking before the meeting. For me, yes, a vision for me. And that is the vision of one of us who's recovered carrying this message to others and watching that fellowship rise up around us, carrying the message one alcoholic to another, or what one addict or what compulsive, whatever brings you to this study. So our hope is that when this chip of a book, it's a delightful little chip of a book, it's a good one, I like it, we should study it, that's what's happening. So when this chip of the book is launched on the world tide of alcoholism, man, if you're like me and you're working with alcoholics, if you're working with people who are suffering, sometimes it really does feel like a tide, a little like a tsunami, this overwhelming wave of pain and suffering and illness. But when this book is released on that tide of alcoholism, it says defeated drinkers. When we talk about defeated drinkers, what I want to point out is hopeless. Drinkers who feel hopeless, people who are suffering and feel hopeless, will seize upon it to talk about what it says in 3 topic meetings, to argue about no, we'll seize upon it to follow its suggestions. It's almost as though there's that chapter into action. Man, it's so action oriented, this whole program of action. I'm just joking around. I let everyone know it was going to be weird before I started. I didn't get a nap. But to follow its suggestions, to follow this work, to follow these directions. And it says, many we are sure will rise to their feet and march on. And earlier in the book, it referenced the story of the man who was what do you call it? It was I think it was the Lazarus pit, and he could not make it into the pit to be the pit of water to be cured. And it's kind of like us, those of us who are unable to be cured get to rise up. The hopeless, the broken, the beaten, those that are the least likely to get well, those that are the least likely to recover, we get to recover and march on, not lounge at the spiritual vacation destination. You know what I mean? We don't got to chill out at spiritual Cabo. This is a journey. This is a way of life. Although, listen, I could use a little spiritual cup. I was just away for a month. I shouldn't be like requesting any sort of vacation. I'm back. Alrighty. It says, they will approach still other sick ones, and fellowships of Alcoholics Anonymous may spring up in each city and hamlet, havens for those who must find a way out. And a way out was one of the proposed titles of this book, A Way Out. And that's what we're talking about. Not just, I'm not going to drink today, or I'm not going to get high today. No, a way out, real, meaningful freedom. So it says in the chapter, working with others, so that chapter directed and devoted to the 12 steps, you gathered an idea of how we approach and aid others to help. Suppose that now through you, several families have adopted this way of life. And what I want to point out, it is through you. And I love that we have that St. Francis prayer that we use. It's found in step 11 in the 12 and 12. Because that for me perfectly encapsulates what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get me out of the way and let this power flow through me. Let God flow through me. And when I say me, what I mean that I'm getting out of the way is my selfishness, my self-centeredness. That manifests itself in fear, in guilt, in shame. You know what I mean? That stuff, I got to get that out of the way, clear that channel, and let this power flow through me. That's what I'm trying to do. And through me, like I'm trying to let God, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe flow through me. And it says several families have adopted this way of life. On page 97, it spoke about how if an alcoholic isn't open, or if a prospect isn't open, there's no reason why we should neglect their family and offer this way of life to their family as well. That was the early days. And yeah, we're joking about how I need Al-Anon. So absolutely, before Al-Anon was its own vibrant fellowship. So before it existed. And it is adopted this way of life. I always emphasize way of life, not the destination, way of life. These 12 steps, it's not a set it and forget it deal. I was talking about this morning. I can't have crock pot sobriety. I can't set it and forget it. I got to have stir fry sobriety where I'm doing this thing every day and continuing to work it every single day. So it is a way of life. You will want to know more of how to proceed from that point. Perhaps the best way of treating you to a glimpse of your future will be to describe the growth of the fellowship among us. Here is a brief account. So we're diving into the history. Years ago in 1939, one of our number, so this is Bill Wilson. You can just make a note. It's our homie, Bill Wilson. Welcome. We're on the very bottom, page 153. So Bill Wilson made a journey to a certain western city. Now that western city is Akron, Ohio. From a business standpoint, his trip came off badly. Had he been successful in his enterprise, he would have been set on his feet financially, which at the time seemed vitally important. And so Bill Wilson, Rob has got some interesting info about this business deal, and he's put it in the chat. So definitely get a chance, if you get a chance, check it out. I'm going to summarize it, and I'm going to summarize it probably incorrectly or slightly wrong because it's me. So Akron, Ohio used to be the rubber capital of the United States. So they made their money off creating tires. Now, when we were visiting Akron a couple weeks ago, there was a waitress that was like, "Why are you here?" And I, being just a normal person, responded with, "It's the rubber capital of the world." And she said, "It used to be, and you should have smelt it when it was. It was not good." I make friends. But he was gonna so this is where Goodyear, Firestone, Bridgestone, these sorts of companies, were these tires were created, and he was gonna combine these certain companies together. They're probably rubber tire manufacturing. Rob will tell you in the chat, he's got the deets. And man, Bill Wilson, keep in mind, he is 6 months sober and he is struggling financially. But man, he was going to combine these companies and he was going to make money. He was going to be set on his feet financially. Oh, it was all going to be okay. I'm sure no one here relates to having any financial problems at any point in your life, but you can imagine what that stress is. And it's like, here's the thing that I need, right? And I love that it says, which at the time seemed vitally important. Yeah, National Rubber Machinery Company. Yeah, rock and roll. Exciting news. By the way, if you go to Akron and you're like, "Let's talk rubber," they're like, "Let's not." Or at least that's been my experience. Anyway, it says, but his venture wound up in a lawsuit and bogged down completely. The proceeding was shot through with much hard feeling and controversy. I mean, it was bad, guys. There are lawyers involved. Nobody's talking. And I don't know if you guys know what it's like to have this thing. And it's like, man, this is the thing that I need. This is the key to success. This is the key to my happiness. And have it all fall apart. You know what I mean? And here's the interesting thing. I don't know about you, but I'll tell you that more often than not, my journey to God, my journey to a spiritual awakening has never, ever begun with, or almost never, I won't say never, because fingers crossed, knock on wood, that'll happen, but it almost never begins with me getting what I want. Now, almost never. Doesn't my journey to God almost always, or what leads me back to God, me not getting what I want, and instead getting what I need? So Bill Wilson, he doesn't get this rubber company, these companies together to join, and he doesn't get that money. But in him not getting what he wants, something greater rose from that disappointment, something far greater, something far more important. And it's always a good reminder for me, man, I don't know what's best for my life. Truly, I don't. I wasn't going to tell this story, but I just had it on my mind when I did a workshop in Cambridge, Ontario. I had a sponsee that was like, "Do not tell them the story. Don't tell them the story." So in my brain, I'm always like, "Tell the story." because I was told not to, and I have that sort of attitude. But when I was in the third grade, this is just so stupid. I told you it would be weird. But when I was in the third grade, every single one of my friends got conjunctivitis. That is pink eye. Every single one of my friends got pink eye. I didn't get pink eye. And I want you to know I was hurt and sad and resentful. Now, thank goodness I didn't know how you get pink eye. But you know what I mean? It's a good little microcosm for I do not know what was best in my life. I'm like, the key to happiness and success for Paige in the third grade was a real bad bout of conjunctivitis. I never got it. Knock on wood, I don't. Uh, but I don't know what's best for my life. And often in disappointment, that is where God works and God moves, at least in my experience. So it says, bitterly discouraged, he found himself in a strange place, Akron, Ohio, the Midwest, discredited. So keep in mind, not only did he not get what he wanted, but people were talking about him. You know, there was gossip and they were talking about how bad he was. I'm sure no one ever relates to having people talking about us, or that feeling of nobody likes me, you know? Discredited and almost broke, still physically weak and sober but a few months. He saw that his predicament was dangerous. He wanted so much to talk with somebody, but whom? In the 1930s, you couldn't doom scroll and disassociate, which is how I deal with it. No, I deal with it with God, but occasionally a little, you know, he was like wanting connection, you know? And so one dismal afternoon, he paced a hotel lobby. And I'm just gonna, if this works, it might not. Oh, there we go. I have a feeling Rob is going to put a picture. So where Bill Wilson is the Mayflower Hotel. And the Mayflower Hotel is in Akron, Ohio. And I'm sure Rob's got pictures of it. Now, this is a picture from the 1980s. And like in the article, it was like, not only was this where, you know, some of the birthplaces of Alcoholics Anonymous, but they had a rubber festival here, the rubber ball, and everyone had to come and dress in rubber. It's exciting. You just love it. I love it when like places are built on like an industry. Like I was at the corn boil, you know, it's like corn focused. I'm like, delightful. That stuff is fun for me. But this is what the hotel lobby looked like. And if you're like, who's that lady? I don't know. I've never met her. She seems lovely though. So that is what the hotel lobby looked like of the Mayflower Hotel, and it still exists today. It's an interesting thing. Today, it's actually a senior center and or a retirement home or a home for people with disabilities, like an apartment complex. So one dismal afternoon, he paced a hotel lobby. This one. Wondering how his bill was to be paid. See, he didn't have enough money to pay his bill, and he certainly didn't have enough money to get a train to go home to New York. So at one end of the room stood a glass-covered directory of local churches. Now that, I don't know if it mirrors the image, but I think, so it's over the lovely lady's head, I think is the directory. Somebody, Rob will correct me if I'm wrong. So that's the directory, right? Of local churches. And down the lobby, now hopefully it's not mirrored and I'm pointing to the correct door. Down the lobby, a door opened to an attractive bar. He could see the gay crowd inside. In there, he would find companionship and release. Unless he took some drinks, he might not have the courage to scrape up an acquaintance, and he would have a lonely weekend. Of course, he could not drink, but why not sit, hopefully, at a table, a bottle of ginger ale before him? After all, had he not been sober 6 months now? Perhaps he could handle, say, 3 drinks, no more. Fear gripped him. He was on thin ice. Again, it was the old insidious insanity of that first drink. And at this moment, we see that our fates hung in the balance. And, you know, it's like, it's probably not as literally like across the way as I've got the picture describing it, but I imagine to the right of him is the directory and the phone that he can use to call, to reach out, to find somebody to help. And to the left of him, you can hear the bar, and you can almost imagine that laughter and the ha 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 ha. And you can almost hear the clink of ice on the glass, clink, clink, clink. You know what I mean? And in that moment, our fate, not just Bill's fate, but our fate hung in the balance. It was the old insidious insanity, that first drink, the mental obsession. With a shiver, he turned away and walked down to the lobby to the church directory. Music and gay chatter still floated to him from the bar. And in that moment, he turns, and we're going to see that he is struck sane. Sanity is restored to him, but he goes to make the telephone call. Now, I want to be very clear. If I have this illness, I don't have the ability to call before I drink. I don't have the ability to call somebody in recovery before I call the dealer. I don't have that capacity when the obsession is on me. So why is Bill able to go from the hotel lobby pacing to call the phone? Well, what had Bill been doing for those entire 6 months? Bill Wilson had worked the actions that later became our 12 steps. He had a profound spiritual experience, but I can't stay well on one experience. I can't stay well on an old experience. And for those entire 6 months, Bill had been trying and working very hard at trying to carry this message to other alcoholics. He had not been successful. But it was that working with others that allowed him that moment of sanity to go to the church directory, to call different numbers. So it says, what about his responsibilities? His family and the men who would die because they would not know how to get well. Ah, yes, those other alcoholics. There must be many such men. There must be many such in this town. He phoned a clergyman. His sanity returned, and he thanked God. And I want to point something out. He thanked God because it wasn't him playing the tape to the end or thinking through the drink. He knows that it was a power greater than himself. And so it's important, like in that moment, Bill Wilson has the essential ingredients of what we all need in order to stay sober. He has an understanding of what his problem was. He got that from Dr. Silkworth, learning about the physical allergy and the mental obsession. He knows his solution is a spiritual awakening, and he had begun to do the work. And he knows the program of action, that the tangible steps to get from that hopelessness to that hope. And in that moment, he has a connection with a power greater than himself and the desire to go help somebody else. And that's what I need. I need to work these 12 steps and just have that desire to show up to help others. So it says he phoned a clergyman. So it says selecting a church at random from the directory, he stepped into the booth and lifted the receiver. His call to the clergyman led him presently to a certain resident of the town who, though formally respected, was then nearing the nadir. And the nadir is the lowest point of alcoholic despair. Now, the word despair is another way to say hopelessness. So Bill Wilson, he's in that telephone booth. Actually, if you go to the intergroup, I think they have either the telephone or a replica. I wasn't sure. I couldn't quite reach because I can't stand up to do that. But in that telephone booth, what he does is he calls a gentleman by the name of Reverend Walter Tunks. And he calls that person. He gets a hold of Walter Reverend Tunks. And Walter Reverend Tunks gets him in touch with Norman Shepherd. And you can write this down if you want. I think these connections are really, really, really interesting. And I'm a giant nerd, so keep that in mind. But he gets a hold of Norman Shepherd. And Norman Shepherd connects him with my home gal, Henrietta Cyberlink. Yeah, Henrietta Cyberlink. No, it doesn't, when people, when the Olympics are on, they're like, USA. That has a ring to it. Cyberlink doesn't quite have the same ring. But that connected Henrietta Cyberling, and that connected him with Ann Smith. Now, he called a number of churches, but I want to point out those connections. Bill is alone in a strange city. The voice of alcoholism is waving, through the air into his ear from that bar. And he's in that telephone booth, and he's trying to make these calls. And if these calls are missed, like this is the 1930s, there is no answering machine service. There is not call waiting. There is not call forward. Well, there's an operator who will literally plug you in to forward you to the line, but there's not a call forwarding. there's not pagers. And some of you are like, you're going way back. No, I'm going way back before pagers. You know, there were a lot of people that didn't even have their own telephone line. They had a party line where it was a shared telephone. You know what I'm saying? So that's what we're talking about. Like, if any of these calls are missed, is it possible we might not be here? If any of those if those connections don't get made, is it possible that we don't exist? And you know, it's one of those things when I look at my life and I look at the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, man, if I struggle with belief in a power greater than myself, or I struggle with the conception that there could be a power greater than myself, man, when I see these steps or the history, man, to me, it is undeniable that there's a power working. You know what I mean? If any of these calls are missed, we might not be here alive and sober today. In fact, we probably wouldn't. And so Bill Wilson, he gets hold of Reverend Tunks, who gets in contact with Norman Shepherd. Norman Shepherd knows a gal, and that gal is Henrietta Seiberling. Now, I might be telling this part of the story a little bit too early, but I also might not get to it where we're going to pop over to Dr. Bob's Nightmare. So I want to tell it now. And basically, sometimes the ADHD just takes me, and I'm going to say things when I'm going to say things, and I can't not say them. So he gets connected with Henrietta Seiberling. And Bill Wilson picks up the phone, and he's like, I'm a gin hound. I'm a drunk from New York City, and I got to find an alcoholic to help. Do you know of anyone? And Henrietta Seiberling says, this is manna. Manna is the food of the gods. And what she was meaning by that is this is an answered prayer. A couple weeks before Bill Wilson had showed up, they had gotten a prayer group together where they had prayed for Dr. Bob's sobriety. And it was almost a little like an intervention sort of thing. And they were trying to help him. And it's an important reminder that, man, if I'm struggling with a belief in a power greater than myself, is it possible that my sobriety is an answered prayer for somebody else? Do you know what I mean? Is it possible that there were people that were praying for my sobriety, and the fact that I'm alive and sober today is an answer to their prayer? But deeper than that, is it not possible that now I get to be an agent for God, that this power gets to flow through me, and I get to answer the prayers of other people, to be the alcoholic or the addict or the compulsive, whatever brings you to the study, with our hand out and the desire to help another person? We get to be an answer to their prayer. Is it possible? And man, that's the thing I don't want to miss. I don't want to miss that. Like, I want to be that person. I want to be that agent for God, you know? I want to be that channel. And it's like, yeah, if I'm ever struggling with belief, I can look at the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I can also look at my own life, and the lives of those sober, stupid, happy drunks. Because when I'm miserable, they seem stupid because they're happy, you know, and that they are an answered prayer. And this is something I was talking about a little bit more in the chapter 2 Wives. But man, if there is anyone in my life that I want to help, but they're maybe not open to it, or they're not receptive to it, or I'm too close to them as a family member for me to really carry this message to them. Or if I got a sponsee that relapsed and I love that sponsee and I can't, and they're just not open right now. What I found the most helpful thing to do is go take and channel that energy to somebody who is open, to somebody who wants it. You know, help who is in front of me. Be that agent of God for those that are in front of me. So it leads into Ann Smith, right? And this is, and I'll stop the share. I don't think we need the, unless you guys want it. We have the little background. Glad you guys are here. Alrighty. So he's nearing the nadir, the lowest point of alcoholic despair. It was the usual situation. So if you're new to this study, if you're new to sobriety, if you're just coming back from a relapse and you are experiencing these things, what I want you to know is that is usual for us. This is what our life burnt to the ground typically looks like. So it says home in jeopardy, some financial stuff. Hold on, lost it. Home in jeopardy, wife ill, children distracted, bills in arrears, and standing damage. The bills in arrears, unpaid bills. Wife ill, stressed out, and like probably a nervous wreck dealing with us. And when we talk about standing damage, not having a stellar reputation. That's what that means. I will let you know when I darken the doors of 12-step rooms that my reputation was not a glowing recommendation from everyone. It was, the standing was quite damaged. It wasn't standing. It was barely a lean. I think it was horizontal is what my standing was when I got here. That's not how you conjugate that. But anywho, so it says he had, and this is important, he had a desperate desire to stop, but saw no way out. So he's the desire to stay sober, but he can't stay sober. And again, if you're new, if you're struggling, man, that's us. I want to stay sober, but I can't stay sober. That is this illness. And it says, for he had earnestly tried many avenues of escape. And if I'm new to the study, if I'm new to the rooms of 12-step, man, did I try many avenues of escape? Isn't it usually 12-step is the last thing I try? Or the last, let me rephrase that. 12-step is the last place I go, and the 12 steps are the last things I possibly try. You know what I mean? I gotta try everything else. And here's my experience. I don't know if it's yours, but nothing else worked. And I didn't try everything, but everything that I tried failed. And I was at that desire to stop, but saw no way out. And earnestly, he had genuinely given it his best effort to try to stay sober these other ways. Painfully aware of being somehow abnormal, the man did not fully realize what it meant to be an alcoholic. And keep in mind, I'm just going to summarize it. We're going to say it again and again and again. What does it mean to have this illness? Lack of control once I start to drink or use, or whatever compulsive action. Lack of control. Once I start, I can't stop. I can't control it every single time. And then lack of choice. And what we're talking about is the mental obsession. I say I don't want to do it. I say I'm never going to do it again. I say I'm just going to stay sober for this week or dry January or whatever, and I do it again. Physical allergy, mental obsession. Another way to say it, lack of control, lack of choice. He did not know what was wrong with him. So when our friend, this is our homie, Bill W. So Bill W. showing up to visit Dr. Bob. This is the story. When our friend related his experience, the man, Dr. Bob, agreed that no amount of willpower he might muster could stop his drinking for long. And I want to point something out. I think this is a step one for Dr. Bob. Because oftentimes we think step one is this idea that I can never safely drink or whatever brings me to the study. But the truth of the matter, step one is I can never, ever safely drink again, and I will. Step one is the deep concession that I am going to relapse. That is what step one is. And I think that is his step one experience. So he goes on to say, and so that's our problem. A spiritual experience, hey, that's our solution. That is the solution in AACA in 12-step. Our solution is a spiritual awakening. The spiritual experience he conceded was absolutely necessary. And that sounds like a second step. He's believing that one could be possible. He's just opened his mind to the second step. Now, this is where we're going to see him a little stuttering around that third step. But the price seemed high upon the basis suggested. Anyone have a look at the steps on the wall or on the Zoom screen? They're like, ooh, that seems pretty drastic. And I'm sure I'm the only one here who ever did a thing. It's called auditing the steps. It's completely different than like doing the steps, taking the actions of the steps, working the steps. It's absolutely not even talking about the steps. Auditing the steps looks a little bit like this one, some of that one, a little bit. No, I've already done that one. I don't need to do that one. Some of that, no. And meditation, no, thank you. Working, no, not doing that. That's what auditing the steps looks like. And I'm sure I'm the only one that's ever given it a good audit, you know. Sure, y'all were bustling with willingness, but Dr. Bob wasn't. And we're gonna hop over to Dr. Bob's nightmare, and we're gonna see what he was open to and what he was not open to, and the results of that. So he told how he lived in constant worry about those who might find out about his alcoholism. He had, of course, the familiar alcoholic obsession that few knew of his drinking. You know, that like everyone's going to find out. By the way, We weren't too worried about that when we were on top of the table, you know. Weren't too worried about that when I know just me behind the dumpster with the wet pants. I know, just me. But I wasn't too worried about who saw me then, you know. But he had, of course, the familiar alcoholic obsession that few knew of his drinking. Why, he argued, should he lose the remainder of his business, only to bring still more suffering to his family by foolishly admitting his plight to the people from whom he made his livelihood? He would do anything, he said, but that. So what we're seeing, what Rob put in the chat is Dr. Bob was willing, but just not going to make amends. That's what it's saying. He's willing to do all of it, but not amends. And so we're going to see how that played out for him. So if you guys, I was going to say if you guys want, but we're going to do it if you don't want. But again, it is consensual. You don't have to come along with me. You can make in your note in your book. We're going to pop over. I like to pop over to page 178. And we're going to see this from Dr. Bob's perspective. So Dr. Bob, our intrepid co-founder, Bill Wilson's going to carry the message to him. I think pretty intrepid. That was more of like a bit of a like comic book. The thrilling adventures are of Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, our intrepid co-founders. Will they carry the message to AA number 3? Find out in the next episode. I don't know why my brain works like this. It's weird, and I know it is. Anywho, page 178. About the time of the beer experiment, first full paragraph. If you're wondering, let me summarize the beer experiment. He was going to drink only beer, because nobody ever got drunk on beer. Anyone ever do a beer experiment? It didn't work so well, and it got a little bloated. So around the time of the beer experiment, I was thrown in with a crowd of people. So this is about 1933. And the crowd of people he got thrown in with was the Oxford group of Akron, Ohio. And the Oxford group, what I want to point out is they were a religious organization, and they didn't have anything inherently to do with alcoholism. That wasn't sort of their focus or their mandate. Their focus, their mandate, or their purpose was about having a deeper experience of the God of their understanding. But it is from their series of actions that we have derived the 12 steps. So nothing to do with drinking, but everything to do with a deeper experience of a God of their understanding. So I was thrown in with a crowd of people who attracted me because of their seeming poise, health, and happiness. They spoke with great freedom from embarrassment, which I could never do. They seemed very much at ease on all occasions and appeared very healthy. More than these attributes, they seemed to be happy. I just want to emphasize something. I talk about this a lot, that I am not called to intellectualize these 12 steps. It's not about what I think or what I feel or what I believe. The 12 steps are about the actions that I take. But it doesn't do, at least my experience in my relationships, it doesn't do any good if I show up cranky and miserable and irritable and clearly barely hanging on from a thread and I'm like, here's what you need to do. It's like, I don't want that. No, thank you. You know what I mean? I have a responsibility. And nobody else, you guys don't have to, but I do. Like, I feel truly I have a responsibility to demonstrate these steps in all my affairs, to be a demonstration of this power, to work these 12 steps as a way of life in such a way that those who are hurting, those who are struggling, those who do not know that there is a way out, you know what I'm saying? To help those. Like I really believe that my responsibility is to show up just like our friend Abby Thatcher showed up and carried the message to Bill. Doesn't have to be fresh skinned. I got some acne and some stuff, but that light that is not my own. Do you know what I mean? To shine that light. That is what I truly feel I'm called to do, to be a demonstration. And that's what we saw. Dr. Bob is drawn into these crowd of Oxford group members, not because they're saying the right thing, not because they know the right thing, not because they believe the right thing, not because they have good ideas, but they are demonstrating the power of their God working in their life. That demonstration looks like health, happiness, poise. Some of you are like, girl, you don't got no poise. accurate. Freedom from embarrassment. Yeah, fair enough. I'll take it. They appeared happy. You know what I mean? Healthy, like that. They demonstrated something. And if you remember back to your first meeting, I mean, you probably don't remember what was said. You might remember one thing if there was something that stuck out for you, but you probably remember how you felt. You know what I'm saying? You probably remember how people made you feel. You probably remembered that vibe, you know, that energy that you can feel in a meeting, especially if it's a meeting where people are just on fire for this thing, you know, where it's electric. And it can be electric on in person or on Zoom. And I don't mean literally electric as in you plugged it in to go get on Zoom. Uh, that is an electricity pun. We're talking about that power flowing through us like the electricity that was mentioned in the chapter Reagnostics. It's a spiritual metaphor. Focus page. Okay. So I was self-conscious. I'm sure none of us relate to that. Being self-conscious, focused on self, and ill at ease most of the time. Ill at ease is that like anxiety and that feeling that something's wrong. My health was at the breaking point, and I was thoroughly miserable. That might sound familiar. I sensed they had something I did not have, right? A demonstration from which I might readily profit. I learned it was something of a spiritual nature, which did not appeal to me very much. Even Dr. Bob, who is considered our more religious co-founder, wasn't super jazzercised about the God idea. You know what I mean? Sometimes we talk about like, oh man, I struggled with the God idea, as if like, no, I think almost all of us did. It's those who didn't struggle with the concept of God. That's like weird. Not weird, not judgment. It's like when I tell people like, I actually didn't shoplift. That's weird. I didn't have any shoplifting amends. Weird, you know? I'm a weirdo for not having shoplifted. Anyway, I did other things. Listen, and I'm not pure as, you know, white as snow. You know, I did other things. All right. So I learned it was something of a spiritual nature, which did not appeal to me very much. But I thought it could do no harm. I gave the matter much time and study for the next 2.5 years, but still got tight every night, nevertheless. That's drunk. Still got drunk every night, nevertheless. I read everything I could find and talked to everyone who I thought knew anything about it. My wife became deeply interested, and it was her interest that sustained mine, though at no point I sensed it might be an answer to my liquor problems. How my wife kept her faith and courage during all those years, I will never know, but she did. If she had not, I know I would have been dead a long time ago. Now, I will be honest with you. This is where I like to take off my alcoholic hat and put on my Al-Anon hat. So I'm just going to put on my Al-Anon hat for a little moment, and it says, for some reason, we alcoholics seem to have a gift for picking out the world's finest women. Oh, how did you know? I'm a delight. Al-Anon hat off, alcoholic hat on. I am so sorry for the damage I've done in my relationships. That's not an amends, by the way. But just we get to that. I'm like, God, how did you? I'm a delight, you know? No, take that. Put the other one on. Alrighty. I was not a delight. You can ask my exes. Alrighty. Why they should be subjected to our tortures, subjected to the tortures we inflict upon them, I cannot explain. Now, hold on, let me see if this will work. I think it might. Hold on. I'm just gonna let's see if I can. Wait, hold on. There we go. So this is Dr. Bob's house. By the way, I took these pictures, so they're not amazing because I don't have a good camera. And I am a hand talker, so I don't always have a steady hand. But this is where Dr. Bob was living. And so it says, about this time, a lady called up my wife one Saturday afternoon. So this is Henrietta Seiberling. This is our homegirl, the Sibes. Nobody calls her that. And they probably do not like it if you call her that. But that's who we're talking about. Henrietta Seiberling. Saying that she wanted me to come over that evening to meet a friend of hers who might help me. So again, this is Bill Wilson in the Mayflower Hotel. He picks up the phone and he calls Reverend Walter Tunks, who calls and gets him in contact with Norman Shepherd, who gets him in contact with Henrietta Seiberling. And Henrietta Seiberling is calling Anne Smith and making those connections. And so that's who we're talking about. So one Saturday afternoon, saying that she wanted me to come over that evening to meet a friend of hers who might help me. It was the day before Mother's Day. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. And I had come home plastered. So we come home here, plastered, carrying a big potted plant, which I set down on the table and forthwith went upstairs and passed out. And I just love this because he's talking about how much Anne has sacrificed and what poor Anne has gone through dealing with him. And it's Mother's Day. You know what I mean? It's Mother's Day. Like, I've got to do something real nice. So he gets absolutely hammered. And I just imagine the potted plant was not one that he purchased at a garden center. I imagine he got drunk and stole one of those really big ones that you find out of. I don't have any proof of this. This is just how my silly little brain works. And he drags that potted plant all the way home, and you can just imagine all the dirt going up. And then, so he puts it on. Now this is the dining room table. So he might have plopped it on that table. You know what I mean? And just like plopped it down right there. And I always imagine it's got a crack in it and the soil's just like falling on the floor and he's like footprints. Now, it might also been this table, which is the kitchen table. And they had cookies, which was lovely. I had a cookie. So we might have put it on the kitchen table. And if you're wondering, this is upstairs. This is the bed he would have passed out in, or replica of the bed he would have passed out on. So that was Dr. Bob for Mother's Day. And so he had kind of, and I'm sure nobody knows what it's like to get drunk the day before, the day of a very special occasion. I'm sure no one relates to that and having ruined, the holiday. But it says, the next day she called again. And wishing to be polite, though I felt very badly, I said, let's make the call. So sometimes what opens us up in terms of willingness is burning our life to the ground and harming others. You know what I mean? He messed up Mother's Day, and he had talked to everyone and anyone who knew anything about the Oxford group, and he'd really done a lot to try to solve his alcoholism, as nothing had worked. And if you know what it's like to try something again and again and again, and it not work, then you probably know what it's like to relate with Dr. Bob. It's like, I don't want to talk to another person. But because he messed up, he was willing, right? It always starts with us not getting what we want. He was willing to talk to Bill Wilson. So I said, let's make the call. And I extracted from my wife a promise that we would not stay over 15 minutes. That's it. It's going to be a quick in and out. I'll go over to her house 15 minutes. So we entered her house at exactly 5 o'clock. Now, this is a picture of the house that they met at, and it's what's known as the Gatehouse. And if you're wondering why, because I didn't know why it was called the Gatehouse, I didn't think too much by it. The place that she lived, it is unimaginably large. When we went to visit, they were having a 1980s, not at 1980s, an 1880s baseball tournament. So they were playing in like 1880s, like 1800s baseball outfits and 1800s rules tournament. Not one team playing at a time, a tournament. They have a botanical gardens. They have it is huge. It is, the whole thing is massive. The main house is like a castle, like a legit castle. Like it's a whole God story about how I was able to go and see the Gatehouse. It really was God showing up and doing for me, because I mean, that's what I wanted to see, but it was looking like it might not happen. And so this was the Gatehouse, and you might be like, so the Gatehouse is, it's that tiny little house by the gate, the gate that lets you into the huge complex that is the Seiberling estate, because they had money, the Seiberlings. Money. Rob will put, I'm sure, since I can see him going like, info in the chat. And so the Gatehouse, which is like a normal sized house, so it's puny and, tiny. So this is the house that they met at. And this was a picture I took of the library. And that's where they first met in the living room, and Bill was there early. He had dinner. but they met in the library, and this is a picture of the chairs that they sat in when they had their meeting. So we entered her house at exactly 5 o'clock. It shows up there 5 o'clock, and it was 11:15 when we left. So they were staying for well over, that 15 minutes. I had a couple of shorter talks with this man afterward and stopped drinking abruptly. Now, keep in mind, he was willing to do some of the work, but he was not willing to do all of it. This dry spell lasted for about 3 weeks. Then I went to Atlantic City to attend a several days meeting of a national society of which I was a member. So he goes to a medical conference in Atlantic City. Now, I'm going to say something which might be a little like, it's probably, I say weird things all the time, so I don't think anything I'm going to say is going to be like, ooh. But the time of this conference was very likely June 10th to June 14th. So we celebrate June 10th as Founders Day because it was believed to be Dr. Bob's sobriety date. But his actual sobriety date, in typical alcoholic fashion, just getting it wrong, was more likely June 17th. But we celebrated as the 10th. But regardless, so he's going to Atlantic City, and he's going to show up, and he's going to okay, he goes, and it's, he's a doctor, right? And so it says this dry spell lasted for about 3 weeks. Then I went to Atlantic City to attend several days meeting of a national society of which I was a member. I drank all the scotch they had on the train and bought several quarts on my way to the hotel. This was on Sunday. I got tight that night, stayed sober Monday till after dinner, then proceeded to get tight again. And when we say tight, what we mean is drunk. I got drunk and then proceeded to get drunk again. He's going on a bender, an Atlantic City bender. So I stayed sober till Monday until after dinner, then proceeded to get tight again. I drank all I dared in the bar and then went to my room to finish the job. Tuesday, I started in the morning getting well organized by noon. And I like to make the joke, I'm not an alcoholic. I just am really into organization, getting well organized, I'm like just Marie Kondoing it. Oh, this bottle brings me joy. I'll keep it, just getting drunk. So I did not want to disgrace myself, so I then checked out. I bought some more liquor on the way to the depot. I had to wait some time for the train. I remember nothing from then on until I woke up at a friend's house in a town near home. So he goes on a spree. And I just want to point something out. It is not actually a friend's house. It was Lily, his office receptionist. So he got blackout drunk and showed up blackout drunk at his employee's home. Just if you're wondering if that's not cool, you know what I mean? Like, oh, and if you're like, oh, nobody can find out I'm an alcoholic, that might bust that wide open. So he goes on a rip roaring bender. It says, these good people notified my wife, who sent my newly made friend, that is Bill Wilson, over to get me. He came and got me home and to bed. He gave me a few drinks that night and 1 bottle of beer the next morning. So the next morning, Dr. Bob had surgery, and he had to perform, surgery. And what happened is they had to give him, he was going through symptoms of DTs, and he was a colorectal surgeon, a proctologist, and he was not doing well. He needed that client, he needed to perform that surgery, and so they gave him a bottle of beer, and I believe it was a goofball or two, which would be a sedative, because yeah, we don't regularly refer to things as goofballs, although I'm sure that name is applied to me a time or two. All right. And so let us, normally at this point, I would pop us back. Yeah, let's pop back. Let's pop back to page 155. And let's see what happened. So let's pop back to page 155. Let's go to the very bottom paragraph, 155. Being intrigued, however, he invited our friend to his home. So bottom paragraph 155. Sometime later, and just as he thought he was getting control of his liquor situation, he went on a roaring bender. And that's the story we read. He goes Atlantic City, shows up to the office receptionist. It goes bad. For him, this was the spree that ended all sprees. He saw that he would have to face his problems squarely, that God might give him mastery. So one morning, and I want to point out that one morning, which is very likely the 17th of June, which is very likely his sobriety date, but we celebrated as June 10th. So one morning he took the bull by the horns, and that was the morning he got up to go perform surgery and set out to tell those he feared what his trouble had been. He found himself surprisingly well received and learned that, shocker, surprise, many knew of his drinking. What? Stepping into his car, he made the rounds of people he had hurt. He trembled as he went about, for this might mean ruin, particularly for a person in his line of business. And I describe it as Dr. Bob went on a bender, and then he went, let me see if I can grab it real quick. Oh, there it is. And then he went on a amender. I make these little silly little designs. So he went on a bender and he went on an amender. So he went out and he made all his amends. And it was from that point on that Dr. Bob had permanent sobriety. And I think it was last week. No, it was not last week. It was a number of weeks ago. I was not joking, but I was talking about the 3 directions on what to do if I have relapsed after coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. And Dr. Bob had that experience. He was introduced to the Problem Solution Program of Action. He made a beginning. He goes on a bender. Then what does he do? He goes and makes his amends. Because when I relapse, it's not what happened. A relapse is inevitable. That's what we see in step 1. And nothing less than a spiritual awakening. If I fail to grow this spiritual way of life, I'm going to relapse. So it's about taking the actions I did not take. So if I've relapsed, often what do I need to do? Dive into the action that I was not taking. Going on that amender. Go set right those wrongs. That's what Dr. Bob did. So it says at midnight, he came home exhausted, but very happy. He has not had a drink since. So in those, he had lived for 16 more years. And in those 16 years, he oversaw the case and treatment of 5,000 different alcoholics. You know, he had permanent sobriety before he died of cancer in 55, I believe. If my numbers are wrong, people will absolutely correct me in the chat. Listen, I was up early. I can't do math at this hour. I used to be a math tutor. That should scare people. All righty, focus. As we shall see, he now means a great deal to his community and the major liabilities. So the harms caused of 30 years of hard drinking have been repaired in full. And so what I will do is I'll stop the recording, and we're going to see how one alcoholic working with another next week began to really carry this message of Alcoholics Anonymous. So November 16th, 1950. Yeah, I did not do the math right. I'm so glad I caught that before I stopped the recording, so people would be like, she got it right eventually, which is how I do things. 1950. And then, anywho, I will stop the recording and then we'll wrap up with a prayer.